The wind had dropped by the time they reached the bend in the riverbed, leaving the air thick with warmth and a strange, waiting stillness. There was no movement at first, just the baked sand, the scattered acacia leaves, and the dull shine of a massive gray form stretched out beneath a cluster of thorn trees. One of the rangers, walking a few paces ahead, slowed, raising his hand gently. Just beside the fallen shape stood a calf, small, still, and completely alone. Its ears hung low, gently trembling. Dust clung to the folds of its skin, and its flanks rose and fell in slow, unsteady rhythm. The tiny elephant didn't step forward or backward. Instead, it remained pressed against the mother's side, its trunk coiled inward and resting motionless against her leg. There was no panic in the body, only a quiet collapse of presence. Then came the sound, a low, muted whimper like a heartbeat underwater. It came again, a soft, rhythmic cry. It didn't carry far, but it was clear, and it made the rangers stop moving. The mother was gone. Her great body lay unmoving, her trunk curled beside her jaw as if sleep had taken her midway through a breath. The dust around her was flattened in places where she had tried to rise. A broken branch was wedged beneath her side. Her eyes remained open, faded and dim, facing a world she no longer inhabited. The calf pressed its head into her shoulder once more, a slow and aimless gesture. Its feet did not shift, though the hind legs trembled now and again. Each time it cried, its body wavered just slightly, like the sound itself pulled something from within. There were no other elephants nearby, no herds, no tracks leading away, just this small body and the silence that clung to her stillness. One of the rangers moved forward quietly, his boots touching the ground with a careful rhythm. The others stayed back. There was no need for words yet. He crouched some distance away, observing the calf's breathing and posture. The signs were mixed. The calf was not newborn, perhaps a few months old. It had weight in its body but fatigue in its limbs. The eyes looked dull, not from sleep, but from something deeper, slower, as though the calf had not known what else to do except remain here, crying softly beside the only body it trusted. Time passed that way, just watching, listening. A few birds passed overhead, then left. A faint wind stirred the treetops, loosening dry leaves that fell in silence. Still, the calf didn't move. The ranger lowered himself to the sand, sitting cross-legged, arms resting loosely across his knees. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "You're not alone," he said. The calf's ears twitched faintly at the sound, but it didn't turn. It leaned against the mother again, exhaling a tired, shallow breath. A soft moan followed, higher than before. Not sharp, not urgent, only long and tired. The kind of sound that didn't ask for anything but stayed behind, even after. Silence returned. Around them, the morning had begun to rise. A thin line of sun curled along the far ridge, brightening the cracked earth and brushing the mother's body in dull amber. The ranger remained still. No camera, no sudden gesture, just stillness. Somewhere in the distance a drumming call echoed, maybe a hornbill, maybe something farther. The calf turned its head slightly, not toward the sound, but toward something else. Beneath the mother's ribcage the earth looked disturbed, subtle but visible in the sunlight. The ranger noticed it too. A slight shift. Something in the dust had changed. The moment passed as gently as it had come. The calf moved once, one step to the side, trunk brushing against the curve of her belly before it folded back into stillness. And then nothing. No breath, no motion. Just the wind picking up again, loosening more leaves from the trees, sending them tumbling down in lazy spirals beside the calf's feet. The sun had risen higher, drawing long, trembling shadows across the riverbed. Heat shimmered over the sand, warping the horizon in soft waves, but the calf remained where it stood, leaning gently into the mother's flank, trunk draped across her still leg. Its small frame quivered with each breath, and from its chest came those same soft, guttural sobs, drawn out in rhythm with the slow rise and fall of its ribs. The sound no longer echoed. It clung to the ground like smoke, thick and mournful. The rangers had stayed at a respectful distance. No one rushed in. No voices were raised. A silent understanding had formed between them. This moment belonged first to the calf. Its grief was unfolding not in chaos but in the hollow ache of waiting. A few quiet murmurs had passed between them earlier, measured, careful observations, but now they watched, still and grounded like stones set in place. The calf nudged her again. A subtle shift of the head. Its trunk curled beneath the mother's jaw and then uncurled, as if searching for a pulse that no longer lived there. One hind leg bent slightly and then straightened as though preparing to kneel but thinking better of it. The tail moved once, barely lifting, then settled again, limp and still. Flies circled its ears, but it made no effort to brush them away. Hours passed. A swallow dipped low across the basin and disappeared. The wind touched nothing. The air had settled into a kind of hush, heavy with unspoken things. One ranger adjusted the strap of his pack but said nothing. Another crouched lower, his fingers sifting the dry edge of the earth, scanning for signs, not of predators but of possibilities. Somewhere in his gaze was a question. When does watching become waiting too long? It was then that the third ranger, older, slower, knelt closer to the mother's body. He was not intruding, only studying. The way the front leg bent inward, the ribs pressing unevenly against the dust, the shape of her side slightly obscured by the angle of collapse. He leaned in, not touching, just observing. And there it was. Behind the mother's shoulder, just beneath a fold of drying skin, the soil bulged ever so slightly. A soft mound of disturbed dust, raised not by wind or fall, but by something underneath, something that hadn't settled. He turned his head toward the others but didn't speak. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in alarm, but in recognition. The kind of recognition that comes after long years of walking these paths, of seeing life try to rise where no one expects it. The calf gave another cry, louder this time. Not sharp, not distressed, just fuller, carrying a deeper weight. It stepped closer into the body, leaning its side against the great curve of the mother's torso. The sob that followed seemed to fold into the silence, as if asking and answering itself in the same breath. The ranger moved no closer. He only whispered, low and steady. Something's not finished here. Behind the mother's shoulder, the bulge in the dust shifted again, so slowly it might have been missed. Not a kick, not a lurch, just the faintest breath of movement, like the earth itself exhaled beneath her skin. The men did not rush forward. The decision had not yet come, but the air had changed. The sorrow still lingered, and the calf had not stopped crying. Yet now, each sound it made seemed to echo against a different silence, one that no longer felt entirely empty. The riverbed held its breath, and somewhere under the stillness, something small and alive moved again. The mound of dust near the mother's shoulder shifted again, so gently it might have been a trick of light. One ranger stepped forward, not in haste, but with the same reverence he might offer a wounded bird. His breath slowed as he knelt, eyes tracing the faint lines where earth and skin no longer met cleanly. The others watched, still holding the quiet as if it were something fragile. The calf, still beside her, gave a soft exhale. It had stopped crying, not because it no longer grieved, but because something else was happening now. Its body leaned slightly toward the sound, ears rising a little, trunk lifting not in search, but in sensing. Beneath the belly of the fallen mother, the soil bulged once more distinctly this time. Then came the smallest movement, the twitch of a foot, pale and thin, coated in layers of blood and clay. It disappeared again into the hollow where dust and body met. The ranger lowered himself, hand bracing the warm sand, and peered beneath the arch of the mother's ribs. For a long moment, nothing. Then the trembling leg kicked once, weak but purposeful. A slick glint of skin shifted beneath a veil of afterbirth. Dried grasses stuck to the newborn side like loose feathers in wind. The calf was there, hidden, pressed deep into the crook of the lifeless mother's curve. Partially born, partially buried, still breathing. Another ranger joined, crouching low, speaking only. Once in a hushed voice, "She didn't make it through." The first nodded, slow and solemn. The signs were clear now. The mother had died during labor, likely from internal hemorrhage. It had been a hard birth. The kind few survive alone. And yet, through some quiet will, one twin had emerged and waited in mourning. The other had remained beneath her, unnoticed until now, trapped in the place between death and life. The older calf circled uneasily, its trunk swinging wider now, sniffing the air. It stepped backward, then forward again, then let out a low, confused grunt. The scent was different now. Not only death, but something else. Something smaller, something moving. It reached its trunk toward the mother's body but hesitated when it brushed against the slick moisture near the curve of her belly. The rangers moved with careful hands. They did not touch the calf, not yet. Instead, they cleared the earth surrounding the trapped twin, layer by layer, inch by inch. The heat pressed in from above and beads of sweat formed along their brows, but no one spoke. Their movements were slow, coordinated, shaped by long seasons of practice and restraint. The newborn was small, smaller than most at birth. Its eyes were closed, lids twitching in restless patterns. Each breath came in sharp little bursts, as if the lungs were still uncertain of the world they'd entered. Its legs were folded awkwardly beneath its torso, one pressed into a shallow groove of hardened mud. When the last layer of debris was brushed away, it gave a faint kick, more of a reflex than an effort. But it moved. "Still with us," one ranger murmured, eyes not leaving the calf. They knelt there beside it, watching as the newborn blinked once, slowly. A tiny sound rose from its throat, barely audible, a breath broken in half. It was not a cry. It was something simpler, the confirmation of life, a fragile tether. The older sibling had come closer now. Its trunk hovered above the newborn's head, trembling slightly as it lowered and touched the damp skin once. A pause. Then again. No recognition, not yet, only instinct, only curiosity. But it didn't walk away. The light had changed by then. The wind had returned, brushing through the thorn trees with soft, whispering fingers. Dust lifted gently around the twins. One standing, still uncertain. The other, new to the world, curled in the place where sorrow had begun but no longer belonged to it alone. There, beneath the silence of the sky, the mother no longer moved. But something had survived her. Something small, breath-wet and trembling, finding its first shape in the broken earth. One of the rangers moved closer, his steps slow and wide apart, the rhythm of his boots tuned to the silence. The newborn calf had been freed from beneath the mother's body, but it lay motionless, limbs folded beneath itself like crumpled reeds. Each breath was a fragile pull, barely lifting the chest. Its body was slick with afterbirth and dust, streaked in places where the soil had hardened into its fur. The eyes remained closed. The skin around the joints looked thin and wrinkled, like the breath of life had not fully settled into it yet. The older sibling hovered nearby, restless now. It circled in short, tense steps, ears twitching, trunk brushing the ground and then lifting again in slow, searching arcs. It grunted, a low, uncertain sound, and then stood still, head tilted toward the newborn. There was no sign of recognition, only something quiet and primitive, an instinctual awareness that this small shape mattered, even if it did not yet belong. The ranger crouched beside the newborn, placing one hand near the calf's flank without touching. He studied the ribs, the slow rise and fall that sometimes paused too long between. A faint tremor passed through the legs, then stopped. He lowered his voice, calm and careful. "You're almost there," he whispered. The team knew the limits. Intervention was not always the answer, but this calf had been born into shadow and had lived long enough to be seen. That alone was reason to try. Another ranger approached, carrying a damp cloth and a flask of water. There was no urgency, only care. The cloth was pressed gently over the calf's side, wiping away the thickest layer of grime. With each pass, more of the animal's skin was revealed, soft gray, ribbed with the contours of breath. The standing calf took 2 steps forward. It paused, lowered its trunk, and touched the newborn's ear. The contact was brief. Not a gesture of comfort, but of curiosity. The tail swayed slightly. Then it stepped back, ears flattening as one of the rangers knelt closer. The newborn stirred faintly. One foot twitched, then folded under again. Its jaw moved, almost as if chewing air, and a wet gasp followed. A thin, high-pitched sound that faded almost as soon as it came. The ranger leaned closer, letting his breath slow until it matched the rhythm of the calf's chest. The decision had already been made. They would not lift or drag or restrain. They would make space. They would clear the air. They would wait, and if the calf chose to try, they would be ready. A third ranger stood nearby, scanning the horizon. The heat had softened. The light had lost its harshness. Afternoon had begun its long drift toward dusk. The older calf let out a short grunt. Its trunk lifted again, this time brushing across the newborn's side more firmly. The younger twin flinched. Small, but enough to startle the sibling, who stepped back quickly, ears rising. For a moment, all movement stopped. Then, slowly, the newborn shifted its front leg. The motion was shaky, uneven, but it came again, stronger this time. A second leg moved. The head lifted half an inch, then fell. The ranger whispered again, the words lost to the wind but softened by their intention. He didn't reach out. He only waited. The calf moved again. It unfolded like something, remembering its shape for the first time. One foreleg stretched forward. The hind limbs wobbled. It didn't rise, but it didn't go still either. It stayed there, trembling, breathing, trying. The older sibling stepped closer again, more cautious now. It leaned forward and lowered its head until it touched the newborn's flank and did not pull away. The contact held. A stillness returned, no longer heavy, but tentative, holding its breath. Above them, the trees rustled in the breeze, shedding light across the sand in flickers and waves. The earth did not move, but it no longer felt empty. The sun had lowered its hand by the time the newborn shifted again. It came not with urgency, but with a slow, uncertain rhythm. A leg stretching forward, pausing, then folding back. The second leg followed, dragging lightly through the sand. Its breathing was louder now, shallow but continuous, each breath a fragile thread holding it upright. Dust clung to its damp skin like pollen to a leaf, softening the hard lines of birth with the dullness of earth. Its eyes had begun to open in narrow slits, blinking against the fading light, seeing but not yet focusing. Beside it, the older sibling stood still. The wind passed gently between them, stirring their ears and lifting the fur along their spines. The standing calf lowered its head again, pressing the side of its face against the newborn's flank. There was no urgency in the gesture, only weight, warmth, and presence. When the newborn shifted once more, the sibling stepped closer, brushing its shoulder against the smaller frame as if to catch what might fall. The rescue team remained quiet, seated in the sand, allowing time to stretch without interruption. Their hands rested loosely by their sides. No commands, no tools, no movement that might crowd the moment. They had done all they could. What remained was not theirs to control, only to witness. The younger calf moaned softly, a sound of effort more than pain, and lifted its head fully for the first time. It hung for a moment, quivering, then lowered again into the crook of its front legs. But it did not fold. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. And then, with trembling knees and stiff joints, the calf began to rise. It wasn't clean. The back legs gave first, lifting the rear end into an awkward tilt. The front legs scrambled in the dust, slipping once, then again. But the sibling was already there, steadying beside it, nudging from the shoulder, offering quiet balance. When the newborn finally stood, shaking and wide-legged, it stayed upright for 3 full breaths before a stumble sent it collapsing gently into its sibling's side. The older calf didn't flinch. It shifted slightly, took the weight, and waited. One of the rangers whispered something low. No command, no plan, just a single line spoken into the dry air. "You did it." The smaller calf stood again, this time longer. Its legs quivered like reeds in shallow water, but it remained upright. The sibling began to move, slowly, and the newborn followed, awkward at first, but with surprising intention. Together they took a few steps forward, just enough to leave behind the cooling body of their mother. Her outline rested in the dust, larger than life, her presence now more shadow than shape. They didn't look back, not out of indifference, but because something in them understood that what needed to stay had already been left behind. The wind shifted again, curling over the dry ridges and into the clearing. Grass swayed in a hush. The calves paused as the breeze reached them, both lifting their trunks to the scent. Old air touched with distance and memory. Then they lowered their heads and continued, step by step, toward the rise. The rangers stayed seated. Their eyes followed the movement, but their bodies did not. No one needed to lead. No one needed to guide. What had begun in silence was ending the same way, with respect and stillness, held like breath between 2 beats. At the top of the rise, the older calf stopped and turned slightly. The newborn reached its side again, pressing close. Together they stood there just for a moment facing the land ahead. The sun caught them from the side, casting 2 long shadows that stretched back across the sand, touching the space where their mother had lain. Wind moved through the grass below. A tree bent gently at its crown. The herd would be far off still, but the land no longer felt empty. And in that light, Two small figures continued forward, side by side, quiet and alive, until only their shadows remained behind. Their pace was slow, almost swaying, shaped by fatigue and instinct. The smaller calf lagged slightly behind, each step deliberate, its legs still uncertain of the world beneath them. The older sibling, only a few months older but somehow ancient in that moment, paused often, waiting, watching, listening. Their movements carried no urgency. They walked not to escape, but simply because life had asked them to go on. Dust clung to their flanks, thin patches of dried mud cracking at the joints. The newborn's skin still shimmered in places where the birth fluids hadn't yet dried completely, drawing flies that buzzed and hovered but were brushed away by a lazy flick of the tail. Its ears flopped awkwardly with each unsteady step, sometimes folding, sometimes dragging. The older calf moved with more purpose now, guiding rather than leading, its steps quieter than before, as if understanding that too much noise could unravel this fragile beginning. Behind them, the rangers had not moved. They remained seated on the warm earth, knees drawn in, hands resting on packs and laps. No one took photographs. No one reached for a radio. There was nothing to document that could capture what was being witnessed, not in lines or pixels or files. They watched in stillness, reverent as the last light of day spilled across the backs of the young. The newborn stumbled again. A soft collapse, knees folding inward, chin pressing into the ground. A short grunt escaped its throat. The sibling stopped immediately, turned, and approached. There was no pause, no analysis. It simply placed its trunk over the newborn's back and stood there, unmoving. After a few seconds, the calf began to rise again, this time slower, more carefully. The dust fell from its legs in little clouds. When it finally stood, it leaned gently into its sibling's side before continuing. A pair of doves landed on a nearby branch. Somewhere beyond the trees, a bull bellowed once and was gone. The day was easing into itself, the sky now painted with orange and ash. Long shadows slipped across the clearing, reaching ahead of the calves like memory trailing behind. The mother's body lay still in the distance, her form no longer a center of grief, but a place where something had ended so that something else could begin. The ground ahead rose slightly, leading toward a worn game trail bordered by broken grass and small thorns. It was the same path their mother would have taken had she lived. It curved gently to the west, toward water, toward shelter, toward the possibility of a herd. The calves didn't know that. They only moved because the land felt open now, and the wind smelled different. It carried no panic, no warning, only the quiet breath of dusk. The older calf stopped again and looked back, its ears lifted halfway. It wasn't a farewell, but it was a pause that held weight, the kind of moment that remains in a ranger's memory long after boots have left the sand. The newborn caught up, pressing its head into the sibling's ribs as if drawn not by direction, but by warmth. They touched trunks for a second, awkward, unbalanced, and then walked on. Behind them, one of the rangers whispered without meaning to, "Go on." It was not an instruction. It was permission, a soft, human letting go. A breeze rolled low across the clearing. The mother's body remained still, now dusted in the first shadow of evening. The earth around her bore the shape of the struggle, but even that was beginning to fade beneath the soft comb of wind and time. Ahead, the calves walked side by side, two small bodies casting one wide shadow. The trail bent and vanished beyond a rise. The older calf stepped first, the newborn followed, and then there was only light, and the hush of grass swaying under a sky that watched and remembered. The rise ahead softened beneath their feet, a slope worn down by generations of quiet passage. Each step left a faint imprint in the dust, the kind that would disappear before dawn. The newborn's gait was still uneven, knees trembling with every few paces, but it did not fall again. Its strength was not in speed or certainty, but in the simple will to follow, to stay close, to keep moving. The siblings stayed beside it, always adjusting, always watching. Their bodies touched often, gently, like reeds brushing in the wind. As they crested the hill, the horizon widened. The last of the sun poured across the sky in golden bands, warming the edges of everything it touched. Acacia trees stood in silhouette, their branches spread like open hands. The birds had quieted, save for one or two lingering calls, soft and distant. A ribbon of cool air moved across the ridge, tugging at the tips of the grass and carrying with it the scent of water. a shallow stream, not far now. The calves paused as the breeze passed through them. They lifted their trunks, tested the wind, then moved forward once more. Down below, the trail led toward a cluster of brush where larger tracks had gathered. The rangers knew what that meant. A small herd had passed through recently, females likely, judging by the spacing, perhaps a matriarch, perhaps a sister. Hope, in its simplest form, stirred gently among the dust and the wind. The calves did not rush. They followed the fading light as if it were a memory being carried ahead of them. Each step carved a little more distance between them and the place where sorrow had rooted itself just hours before. But sorrow didn't cling to them. It remained behind, silent, folded into the body of the mother who had given all she had. The rangers stood now, quietly, their shadows long behind them. One reached for a flask but didn't drink. Another watched the trail long after the calves disappeared from sight. No words were spoken. None were needed. Down in the valley, the first stars began to show. The grass whispered, and the trail turned silver under the coming night. And somewhere along that winding path, two small figures moved slowly together, tired, trembling, but alive.